Welcome back, all you surfers. Welcome to 2020. I'm Chris McCleary with another surf report. This one for week starting January 2nd, 2020 through January 8th. We have a lot of different influences going on, and this is one of those weeks where I really appreciate having more than just the astrology to help us focus in on the main energetic influence. For those of you who are new here, welcome. What we're trying to do here is to triangulate influences. Astrology is not the only influence out there, and we can learn about some of the other influences through what's called the collective unconscious, and we do that via the collective dreams. We also do I-Ching readings. So welcome. And in this installment, this week, we have quite a few planets in Capricorn. We have several conjunctions, and the sun being right in the middle of all those conjunctions. And so in this week, it's transitioning from the early set of conjunctions to the kind of the later, more serious sets of conjunctions later. In the next CIRF report, we'll be talking about Sun conjunct Saturn and Pluto. But in this one, we're looking at Mercury and Jupiter, as well as the South Node. We have Mars transitioning into Sagittarius, so we'll talk about what that means. And we also have Mars with an inconjunct to Uranus. And the reason why I include that is because of the synchronicity there. With Mars, when you have an inconjunct, we have adjustments needing to be made. Well, with Uranus, there's some changes that are going to happen. So obviously some adjustments there. But when someone or when a planet like Mars goes into a different sign, Sagittarius, there's some adjustments there as well. So it all points to adjusting and change. Then I just talked about the sun as well. So then we go over to the dream bot, which we're going to talk about next. These memes aren't real strong, as you'll see. The strongest one is more about adapting and change, which I just talked about the astrology. So that part really matches. Slave master, I've got a lot to say about that. That really connects with the I-Ching. So that's kind of the overlap here right in the middle. And slave masters kind of has something to do with holding together, or might be feeling enslaved by maybe work environment or the career, or slave to trying to get people to buy your stuff if you're selling stuff. So just kind of the risk or danger of breaking out, of being different, of being an individual, that's at risk this week. I don't want to say at risk. That's not a really great way to say it, but there's almost the influence is that there's a sensation of being different or being an individual, and there's a risk associated with that according to the I-Ching, and we'll get into all this in more specifics. But most importantly, if you hang with me towards the end, you're going to get the solution, and the solution is how do we behave, how do we act, and despite what the influence is, how do we act in order to best utilize the energies that are available to us throughout this week. Okay, that's where we're headed. And let's start with the dream bot. This is the collection of dreams. Is it any coincidence that 2020 is the most common word in the dream bot? That's 2 days in a row, and that's not uncommon. We're in a new year and people dreaming about the new year. And so time becomes our first meme. Time, all the blue arrows. Finally, week. Time is actually a word in there. So time in 2020, there's like a timeline. But there's not a lot of blue arrows there. The red arrows are a little bit more robust. This is more of like a slave owner continuum, because an owner or master god, owner, so you've got the one group of people who are owning, then you've got the word slave in there. So it's more of like a continuum. I put round in there as like rounding people up or rounding up, hurting, that kind of thing, and pushed. So we're pushing people. So that's kind of the slave owner continuum. And again, it's not a huge meme, but it's in terms of social life, that's kind of probably the biggest overlap there. But then notice the biggest meme is the orange or yellow arrows, which is travel, adapting, change, confusion. Anytime that you're adapting, there's a moment of kind of confusion until you figure out the pattern or figure out the new item that you've got to adapt to. So those are the main memes. Let's go back to let's move on to the astrology. And then in this chart here, you're going to see that all of the planets are remaining in their same sign except for Mars. And before I get further along, I keep forgetting to get this pointer focus. So that will help us to identify. So up in here, there's no planets that are moving into different signs except for Mars, and that's going to be around Friday or Saturday. I'll be more specific as we nail down each day's astrology. But Mars moving out of Scorpio into Sagittarius. Then we're looking in between these two thick black lines for all the different aspects. And with all this red here, that looks kind of scary, but I'm going to just tell you we're not going to go through all these different aspects right now, as we're going to go through them later. But most of these are conjunctions. And I don't view conjunctions as a red. I can't change these colors. But conjunctions are not like warnings. They're not bad things. They're more like a conglomeration or a melding of two different planets or entities, if you will. So, for example, Mercury conjunct Saturn is happening towards the end of the week. Those go exact later on the 12th, which would be the next CIRF report. But they're within that orb this current week. So with Mars conjunct Saturn, you've got thoughts, communication, conjunct with Saturn's the foundation, or the ways things should have been or should be, rules sets and that sort of thing, laws, stability. So if you meld those things together, that's what you get with a conjunction. It's almost like a whole different planet, if you want to think about a whole different planet with those attributes melded together. And obviously, the closer they get, the stronger that melding is. So like the 12th is going to be the exact point of Mercury conjunct Saturn. All right, let's move on. So we get down into Thursday, January the 2nd. I'm going to talk about the main conjunctions right now. This is in Capricorn. We have the Sun, all conjunct, the Sun, South Node, Mercury, and Jupiter. Now these are, Mercury and Jupiter together is very optimistic, very open and expansive thoughts and communication. But with the South Node there in the mix, we're kind of looking at nostalgia. So we have positive thoughts more about the past, but in South Node's not really our current day's past or recent past. It's more of like an ancient karmic past, but nonetheless, so you're kind of reflecting on old patterns. Well, it's a positive spin. It's a positive memory. It's a positive perception on these old patterns. And a lot of people would say that South Node is kind of where you're coming from, or where you're learning to evolve out of in this lifetime. So my point here is that ego, the sun, so your ego is reflecting on where you've been in maybe this life or past lives or before this life, whatever, and have a positive spin on that. We might be recreating those patterns. So in a kind of a materialistic standpoint, if you had wealth before and then maybe something happened, a bankruptcy, you're coming back now, this is 10 years later, recreating that wealth that you had, maybe creating a new business, maybe maybe recreating the same business, maybe saving the same. That's just a simple analogy. Maybe you had a certain car in the past and for some reason lost it, and now getting that back. And a lot of this doesn't have to be materialistic. Those just the easiest examples I could think of. So you got that influence here early in the week. That's going to be, late in the week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. This is going to be very predominant. On top of that, you have a triple square with the moon. And I don't normally spend a lot of time on the moon, but as you can see, conjunct Chiron, so the wounded healer has got 3 squares. Really 4 squares if you want to include the south node in there. Sun, south node, Mercury, Jupiter. So being emotionally attached to everything I just talked about from the past, being very emotionally attached to those things is going to produce obstacles. And so you're not going to be able to move forward if you get too emotionally chaotic, emotionally all over the place, not consistent, or maybe out of control emotions. That's not a good sign here. Those might create obstacles, maybe not being able to see the positive side of past experiences. And then the other important thing I want to highlight here is Mars in conjunct Uranus. And this works out perfectly as this begins. Mars is already getting very close to moving into Sagittarius, right on the cusp, 29 degrees, 34 minutes. And in a couple days, he will be going into Sagittarius, which is going to be a change by itself. But now there has to be an adjustment because we have an in conjunct with Uranus being very change-worthy, a change agent, very, very insightful. So there might be some inspirations coming in. Mars is moving out of his home in Scorpio. It's kind of a secretive but powerful place to be for Mars. And now kind of going out into the wide expanse of Sagittarius, but the deeper meaning of things. And so is seeking, hopefully, some deeper meanings there. But the point is, Mars is going to have to make some adjustments. And that's not easy for Mars. Mars just wants to get stuff done. And I don't want to have to change my plans and all that. But that's the influence there on Thursday. On Friday, the moon now has a double square with Saturn and Pluto, so emotions are still kind of blocked, and this time emotions around transformation and keeping things the same. That whole continuum is going to produce emotional obstacles for you, or could produce. Like I just mentioned, Mars moving right into Sagittarius with that in conjunct to Uranus, and so here we are. We're kind of shifting gears. We're out in the open now, not afraid to show our actions or creative ventures. That's Sagittarius. I don't really care. Just don't hold me back. And that right there could produce some strings on you. You'll notice right away when you're on that horse or on that Sagittarius as you're moving forward, whether or not there's any strings that are pulling you back. You'll notice that very quickly. And those are the adjustments that are going to have to be dealt with. We also have Mercury sextile Neptune, and that's going to be beginning on Friday the 3rd. And our thoughts are really dreamy, but there's going to be opportunity here. There's an opportunity to bring in your dreams. Now, we talked about an opportunity with Mars and Neptune. There was a trine there, and it was easy energy, manifesting your dreams. This one is more planning because it's Mercury, an opportunity to rationalize or to be able to see or plan your dreams, i.e. Neptune, very dreamy. It also can be very squirrely. Sextile is generally very opportunistic, very positive energy. But you can get overly It's going to be hard to tell whether or not you're in the dream, but it's a great place to imagine things, great place to imagine a new or better way of doing things. And so that's going to be a very interesting set of energetic influences. Remember, emotions are kind of blocked from the whole paradigm of keeping things the same versus transformation. But yet we have to adapt from Uranus and Mars, and then Mars going into Sagittarius. There's a lot of adapting that's going to have to be done. And if you get emotionally attached to the way things used to be, that's going to be where these obstacles are created, okay? Now, Saturday, getting into the weekend, I put this chart up. This is 3:31 p.m. Central Standard Time. Moon conjunct Uranus, and we have two sets. We have a set of trines, and we have a set of inconjunct. The trines, these are both of them. This is Uranus and the Moon at this time are making trines to Mercury, South Node, Jupiter. So it's very positive thinking, very positive perspective, positive communication, Pollyannic almost, with any changes that are coming. And emotions easily go with those changes. And then at the same time, we have the inconjunct that we already talked about. Now Moon is, our emotions are invested in this get up and go from Mars in Sagittarius. And emotions are going to actually help now in the adjustment that we talked about earlier that Mars has to make in moving forward and in that new sign. Continuing the weekend on Sunday, we have the Sun now has made its transition from Mercury and Jupiter now over to within the orb of Saturn and Jupiter. And really just want to point out how strong Capricorn is. I know that we have always mentioned this, and this is throughout the last few weeks, few months actually, lots of Capricorn energy. This in and of itself, now with the Sun getting into a conjunction with Saturn, Saturn rules Capricorn, so this is very should oriented. Now it's not real strong, 7 degrees away is just the very beginning of this orb. It's going to get stronger over time. By the end of our CIRF report period, so January 8th, Sun will get very strong with Saturn. And so this is only going to get stronger throughout the week. This one energy of having things being a certain way and seeing myself in those ideals. That's going to be very strong. Seeing myself in those, I must achieve this goal. Seeing yourself achieving those goals, but not just achieving those goals, seeing yourself entitled to, must create those goals or must achieve those goals. So that pressure, there's going to be a pressure there. Your ego identity is going to get lost in those shoulds. Okay, so expect that, but just notice those. I have something to say about this particular influence in the I-Ching solution, and that is we're going to tackle that one step at a time. We're going to do very conscientious moving forward methodically, not being driven by shoulds, but being driven by our values. I have more to say on that later. On Monday, the 6th, we have the Moon oppose Mars. Remember, the Moon was in conjunct earlier. Now it's progressed, moved forward within opposition to Mars. And that's just making sure that we're balanced. We're making sure our emotions are well balanced with what we're pushing forward in. This has everything to do with the I-Ching solution. So I'll just hold off on that. I can have a lot to say there. We'll hold off on that until we get to the I-Ching readings. And then we have Uranus in conjunct Mars still. On Tuesday, let's see here. We've got a new in conjunct, that's the moon and Jupiter. So there's some adjustments that need to be made with your positive emotions. Maybe people are calling you out for being too Pollyannic, too positive, if you will, and then still being emotionally balanced through all of that, swayed to the positive side. That's Tuesday. And then finally on Wednesday, this is where it has a double opposition. So we have Moon conjunct the North Node and Jupiter conjunct the South Node. We have nostalgia in the past. So that's the South Node, nostalgia with Jupiter, because it's very positive in nature, kind of almost wishing I was back in the past. And then on the other side, North Node is where we're going, what our kind of our karma, life path is, life purpose. And we're emotionally invested in that because Moon conjunct North Node. So emotions are going to be related to the future, and we're going to have to balance that with the nostalgia or the desire to recreate the past. Okay, so there could be a conflict there. If you just notice it on Wednesday, I think that would be the best, because at the same time, Mercury is going Cassimi, or starting is within, I think 35 degrees is the rule of thumb for Cassimi, and that's spelled with a C, not a K, as I've indicated there. But anyway, Mercury is getting close to the sun, and it's almost like we're getting blacked out. We're getting, our thoughts are getting so on fire mentally that it's really hard to even think. Some people report rapid speech, rapid thoughts at this time, but I think it's more of like just total saturation, because the sun is basically burning out the mentality here, being able to use rational thought. So try that out on Wednesday the 8th at the end of our CIRF period, and see if this Cassimi is going to affect the way you think. Let's get into the I-Ching reading, because in my opinion, there's going to be a wealth of information about how to handle, how to behave, how to think, and orchestrate your week to maximize the results here. Our first hexagram that we gathered from the coin toss was hexagram 8. And that's water, the trigram of water over earth. What I like to think of water over earth is a lake. Now, a lake is a separate thing, but if you've got water on earth, the water tends to like to gather together. And that's why it's grouping, it's holding together, because water collects to itself, sticks to itself, unites. And that's basically what this image is saying. Water fills up all the empty places on the earth and clings fast to it. The social organization of ancient China was based on this principle of holding together of dependents and rulers. Water flows to unite with water because all parts of it are subject to the same laws. So the influence, what the I-Ching is saying, is that the influence is this need to stay together. That's the influence. And so the need to stay together would also produce the fear of, or the danger of, your individuality. Now, which one are we? Do we need to be one or the other? Some people are saying, I need to be myself. I need to be unique. And other people say, no, we are one. We are all one collective. Well, the answer is both. And the I-Ching knows this as well. There's a time for being a part of the collective, and there's no way to really take yourself out of the collective. You're all part of this crystalline structure of the collective. Now we have an infinite amount of different faces. That's where our individuality is, what Edgar Cayce talked about. Is the individual faces of that crystal. That's our individuality. And the crystal would not be perfect, would not be beautiful if we were all the same. And so individuality is important. But right now, in this week, the I-Ching is saying that don't hold on to your individuality so strong right now. Rather, be looking at whether or not you are properly connected to others. So let's read from the Book of Changes. What is required is that we unite with others in order that all may complement and aid one another through holding together. But such holding together calls for a central figure around whom persons may unite. To become a center of influence holding people together is a grave matter and fraught with great responsibility. It requires greatness of spirit, consistency, and strength. Therefore, let him who wishes to gather others about him ask himself whether he is equal to the undertaking. For anyone attempting to task without a real calling for it only makes more confusion. If a man has recognized the necessity for union and does not feel strong enough to function as the center, it is his duty to become a member of some other organic fellowship. Is it calling everyone to be a leader of the group? I don't think so. I think it's just to have the proper amount of bonding and connection in the group so that you're not a danger to yourself. It's kind of a protective feature. Speaking evolutionarily, if you're venturing off by yourself into the cornfield, there's a good chance you'll be eaten. And so there is a great need for the social aspect and just logical sequence of how we've adapted throughout the ages. But let's look at the lines. As we saw, we have line 1 and line 3 on hexagram 8, and here they are. Fundamental sincerity is the only proper basis for forming relationships. In other words, we just need to be sincere. Don't be going in just because I told you to go into the social groups, and make sure you're connected. The strength is so great that it has the power to attract good fortune to itself from without. Then line 3 says, we are often among people who do not belong to our own sphere. In that case, we must beware of being drawn into false intimacy through force of habit. Needless to say, this would have evil consequences. Maintaining sociability without intimacy is the only right attitude towards people, because otherwise, we should not be free to enter into relationship with people of our own kind later. In other words, we need to be in the habit of being connected to the people, but not being basically codependent or in what the Book of Changes is calling intimate, too connected. So in the group and connected, but not too connected, not too intertwined. All right, now when we apply the changes in hexagram 3 with lines 1 and hexagram 8 with lines 1 and 3, we get water over fire, hexagram 63. This is called after completion. Fording, it says already fording. What that means is at a kind of a low point in the creek, you're either on a horseback riding over the creek or in a car or some sort of vehicle or just walking at a low point over this creek through the water. It's called fording. But water over fire, if you think about when that is applied, it's kind of at the completion. When the fire is done, the campfire is done, you pour water on it to extinguish all the heat and get the coals down so we're not burning down the forest. So water over fire is kind of at the completion, after the completion. That's what it's saying. So here's the image of condition in after completion. The superior man takes thought of misfortune and arms himself against it in advance. So we have completed the goals. And then if you will, you go back to the DreamBot and it's 2020 and you look at the calendar. We're all in a transition. We're all transitioning into a new year, a new decade, if you will. And so you can't just ignore that we have just completed something too. Something new implies that we've also completed something. And that's the state that apparently we're in. So here's the solution, is written in these words in hexagram 63 in the suggestions. Weight your efforts. act gradually, and show self-possession and self-control. Value something you have, but be ready to sacrifice it for sake of great aim achieving. In other words, to make some great achieving, which we all should be wanting to do, I think, in 2020, we don't need to be creating these big plans. We need to be acting gradually, effortful, show self-control, etc., and moving gradually. And that makes sense, based on, I've talked a little bit about like New Year's resolutions and how they rarely do they last any time. This is almost one of those cases again where we should probably have some resolutions, some things that we'd like to get done throughout this year. But you don't have to go too big. We can show gradually, but more consistency throughout the year, throughout the first portion of this as you're developing a new habit. All right, start with small steps. Hope for favorable result and do not complain of fate. Do not wait for quick results and profit. Small has been achieved, and if following the natural course of things, it will turn into something great. On the whole, the situation is favorable, but it should be lived carefully. Expect some sudden changes. Chaos in future, but it is for good. Destruction of old creates conditions for new. Chaos precedes new creative inspiration. All that is right out of the Book of Changes. So it's time now to look at the final summary slide. And this is what we have. I don't know how people are going to feel the different perceptions from the same influence. And if there's a social component to that main influence, then some people could feel enslaved by it. They could feel drudgery. They could feel like, trapped, claustrophobic, that they have to follow the group or they have to be connected to the group. Other people, your extroverts, love the groups and they want to be part of the group. And the oneness people and spiritual folks want everybody else to be one with them. And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's some people are going to perceive it as wonderful because they're in their element, and others are going to feel more like they're caged in. I chose this caged in because of the Dreambot, when it's got the slave kind of owner mindset or continuum. And so I'm thinking that humanity might be seeing that they're trapped with humanity, that kind of thing. So anyway, if you're feeling that, that's normal, but you also have the astrology that we talked about, mainly the conjunctions and the Mars transitioning into Sagittarius. Now, what's interesting, Mars and Sagittarius can produce a slave kind of feeling if you're met with a lot of obstacles, because Mars in Sagittarius wants to just go and doesn't want anybody in their way. And if there is anything in their way, it could feel very restrictive because Mars loves to just go. Sagittarius is that influence of going deeper, wiser, further, long distance travel, etc. And if held back, Mars can't get things done and the Sag can't move forward, well, that's going to feel like this too. So there's another sensation. So that's all the influence. But the solution is multifaceted. First, understand the importance of uniting and hold together with your group. If you don't have a group, find one. Get acquainted with people, maybe with your family, with other close, hobbyists or people in the line of work that you're in. Step 2, locate, estimate future misfortune, and act now to prevent it. So it's in that stage of completion. We're just finishing that stage of 2019 or the solar eclipse. By the way, we're headed into another lunar eclipse. That's going to be a next CIRF report. And so this is that after completion sort of period, which means we need to be looking ahead now and estimating what the next sort of suffering will be and then work now on how to prevent it, okay, or minimize that. All right, next, expect changes. So we move small, deliberate steps forward with a lot of self-control. And then finally, stop any strong attachments that may prevent you from achieving the great successes in the coming changes. There might be things offered to you, but if you're still hanging on to the past or still hanging on to certain attachments, that is going to feel like a sinking effect instead of an achievement success as these changes happen. Here's another similarity. If you're too attached and there's an influence there of Mercury conjunct Jupiter and South Node, you might be attached to the past and so strong in nostalgia that you're recollecting the positive past, but you're not even able to see the positivity coming down in the current changes, and so you're going to miss out on the positive things that are coming down for you. All right, I think that's it. If I missed anything, put those in a comment below. If you have any questions, comment below as well. Just ask those down there. And welcome to 2020. I'm really excited for this year. And we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Happy New Year.